I have to mind my P's and Q's today because, as Father Callahan mentioned, our Superior General is sitting in the sanctuary. It's bad enough when the provincial's here. When the Superior General shows up, you really have to be careful. But we would consider the Superior General sort of the successor of St. Vincent de Paul. And thinking about Vincent de Paul, there was a film made of St. Vincent's life, a French film in 1947. It starred a French actor who was rather famous at the time by the name of Pierre Fresnay. And there are many wonderful scenes in the film, but one of the scenes that I've often remembered is, I suppose you might call it the penultimate scene. It's the last scene before the end. St. Vincent is not very far from death. He's probably a few hours away from death. He's not feeling particularly well. And his assistant, a priest by the name of Father Pertai, comes in to tell him that there is an emissary of the Pope there who is waiting to see him. And Vincent, having that instinct that he is not far from death, says to Pertai, well, please go and kneel at the feet of His Eminence and beg his pardon. But I feel that this evening I must meet another visitor, an even greater visitor. And after a little bit more conversation, St. Vincent decides, however, that there is someone that he wants to see. And the someone that he wants to see is the youngest novice of the Daughters of Charity. In the film, her name is Jeanne, and she is about to make her first visit to the poor. And in the film, it's apparently the custom of St. Vincent to talk to each one before they go to make their first visit to the poor. Pertai, when he hears this, Father Pertai says to him, that's not important. Anyone can tell her about that. And St. Vincent looks at Pertai and he says to him, where I am right now, I know what is important and what is not important. And it's that little thought that I would like to chase for a moment. This morning at morning prayer, the first psalm for morning prayer was Psalm 90. And there is a verse in Psalm 90, verse 12, that goes like this, make us know the shortness of our lives, that we may gain wisdom of heart. It's the 12th verse. Make us know the shortness of our lives, that we might gain wisdom of heart. By now, many of you know from my being here that I'm in my 60s. I'm just entering them. I'm 61. But one of the things that I'm becoming aware of is that getting older is not, contrary to what our culture may think, all that terrible. That in fact, it does bring with it certain, I suppose you would call them luxuries. For example, you can pretty much wear whatever you want to wear. Nobody's going to say anything about that. Even though you shouldn't, you can pretty much eat whatever you really want to eat. But one of the other luxuries that it brings with it is that in time, you begin to see what's really important and what's not important, and which of the various visitors in our lives are truly, truly significant. Father Pieper asked me today to say something about Christ the King. I presume that in part that's because November 20th, which is only a couple weeks away, is the Feast of Christ the King, or as it's officially called in the Missal, the Feast of our Lord Jesus Christ, King of the universe. And I've been thinking a little bit about this. As you get older, besides learning what's important and what's not important, you also tend to learn that some of the most profound truths that you experience in life are very simple. And they come often through story. And when I was thinking about Christ the King, the truth of the matter is, I think that I learned what is most important about Christ the King when I was a little kid. And to be honest with you, I learned it from the nuns who taught us up at St. Benedict's School around the bend, the Sisters of St. Francis. But almost every year at this time in elementary school, it seemed that the nun who taught us always told the same story. And it was about Christ the King. And the story is simple. An old woman, she has a dream. And in the dream, St. Gabriel appears to her, who of course is in charge of delivering messages. And he says to her, tomorrow, the great king is coming to visit you. So the next morning, she gets up and she prepares what food she has for the coming of the great king. And of course, as the story unfolds, there is a rap at the door. And the first person to come to the door is a neighbor of hers whose husband is sick and she needs help. She says to the woman, I really would like to help you, but I can't leave my house because the great king is coming. She sent her next door. Then there's another rap at the door, and it's an old man. He's hungry. And she says to him, I really would like to give you something to eat, but I only have enough for the great king, and I've prepared it for him. And she sends him next door. And then finally, there's a kid that comes to the door who's lost. She needs somebody to help her find her way home. And the woman says to her, I really would love, sweetheart, to help you find your way home, but the great king is coming, and I don't want to miss him. I can't leave my house. And she sends the little girl next door. She finishes her preparations. She's sitting in her rocker. She falls asleep. The great king never appears. She retrieves what she can of the food that she's made, and she goes to bed, and she has a dream again, and Gabriel appears yet again. This time she does the talking. She says to Gabriel, you told me that the great king was coming. I waited all day. He didn't show up. And of course, we can all guess what Gabriel says. Gabriel says to her, he did come. He came 3 times to your door. And each time you sent him next door. I honestly don't exactly know what precisely it means to say that Jesus Christ is king. I am much more comfortable, I suppose, as so many theologians probably would be, in saying what it doesn't mean. And what it doesn't mean is what we sometimes think it does mean. This image of the king is very rarely chased in the 4 Gospels. But there are occasions when it does crop up. In all 4 Gospels, interestingly enough, in the legal proceedings before Pilate, always there is a conversation about whether or not Jesus is a king and what that means. And I always find it rather interesting that at the very moment that our Lord is relinquishing the very kinds of things that we associate with imperial rule, brute power, and great wealth and military, at the very moment that he is relinquishing those things and handing himself over to die, that's when there is speaking around the question of his kingship. And of course, in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 25, when the Son of Man returns, Matthew tells us that the king separates the goats from the sheep because some don't recognize him because he has shown up in the guise of the poor and the hungry and those who are thirsty and those who are naked. And that's my suspicion, that when finally the Lord shows up as the king, paradoxically, he's going to look more like a pauper. And so perhaps there's a sense in which there's always an anxiety around it because we need to keep our eyes open for the coming of this great king. One of our brothers, Brother Augustine, who has been gathered home to God, was a playwright and a poet. I happen to think he was a very good poet. He wrote a little poem entitled Christmas Riddles, and I'm just going to read you a little portion of it. It's supposed to be all of the creatures who were at the crib. There's the ox, there's the donkey, there's the cow, there's the shepherd. But finally, in the 6th stanza, we come to the 3 kings. And he says this: we are kings. There are 3 of us who come with gifts, but finally come with faces of surprise. We searched for a king, but we found a child. And in the 7th stanza, it is the child who speaks, Christ. I am the child, resting on straw. Above me, I can see the ox's nostrils, the cow's great udder, the crisscross of timber under the roof, and the face of the woman, I believe my mother. The ass's braying and the cow's moaning shake me from sleep. What is this place? Why are we here? I have so many questions. The answers will wait, I suspect, until later. This is not what I imagined. Not at all. I'm coming to believe as I get older and older that whatever it means to say that Christ is King, it's not what we imagine. Not at all. It doesn't have to do with power. It doesn't imitate the kings and the emperors and the dictators and the presidents, and for that matter, the presidential candidates, hopefully, of this world. Christ reigns from the palaces of tenement houses and housing projects and the row homes of Philadelphia. Christ reigns from the dining halls of soup kitchens and inns. Christ reigns from the bedchambers of hospices and shelters. Christ reigns, but in a way that we can't even begin to imagine. And so as we think about Christ, who is coming to us as King, we need to keep our eyes open. He may be sitting right next to us.